Alrighty. Hey, welcome to Them Smith Boys. First episode of the new year. Want to wish everybody a happy new year. Hey, what's going on, man?
Hey, what's up, man? What's up? It's been a day.
It's been a day. What's been going on today?
I teach at an alternative school, so every day is a day.
When you say you teach at an alternative school, what is that? What does that mean?
All right, so students who normally, for whatever reason, can't function in the regular school environment, they get sent to us. Ones who have been suspended for long term, some with serious behavior issues and things of that nature.
Okay.
Where the regular setting is not working for them, they get sent to the alternative setting. Same
Okay. So
expectations, though.
so you talking
Same
about
expectations.
like back in the day, the alternative learning center back in the day with Miss
It's a
Baldwin.
little different. Yeah, back in the day, I think it was in school suspension. I think what Miss Baldwin.
Miss Baldwin, yeah. Hey, look, anybody out there from New Bern that's listening right now, y'all know about Miss Baldwin and y'all know about in school suspension.
Yeah, yeah. So she was Miss Baldwin. It's a little different now. This is actually in school suspension, like what it is for a couple of days, but alternative school is a whole separate educational setting.
Okay. Hey,
So
look, I think you broke the record for alternative learning center, man, didn't you? I think I remember that. You broke a record.
yeah, I think I
I
was in
remember.
Miss what 3 weeks. Look,
Yeah, because
the only reason I got
it's
out because
supposed to
I've
only
been
be
on the
like
road.
4 or 5 days.
Say it again.
It's supposed to only be like 4 or 5 days.
Now I think Miss Baldwin liked me that year, man. I think I was in there. Let me think. Yeah, about maybe 3 4 weeks. I think I got out because I've been on the road.
Okay.
If it
All
weren't
right.
for that,
So
I'll still be in there today.
okay. So we're almost 2 weeks into to the new year. Lots of news going on, and I tell you what, even before this came on, one of the things we just found out that the Supreme Court has just struck down the Biden administration's vaccine mandate for businesses over they have over 100 people. So that just
Hmm.
happened. However, they kept it in place for companies that accept Medicaid or Medicare. So it looks like if you're in the healthcare industry, that's still going on.
Yeah,
Yeah, just came up.
yeah. Like there's a difference, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Like there's a difference. Okay.
yeah. What about you, man? What's in the news that you've been interested in?
Nothing much, man. I tell you what. If anybody hasn't been watching, Mothers of the Movement, that's been going on ABC. The first episode was last Thursday. Talks about the Emmett Till murder back in
Yeah,
Mississippi. Yeah, I think it's based on the book Death of Innocence. I tell you, a lot of times when I see movies or anything deals with history, I'm already kind of skeptical because they take a lot of creative license, right?
yeah,
But I must say, um, looking at this, if people didn't know it, I'm telling you, this is as close to an accurate depiction of events as I've ever seen. It's based on the book Death of Innocence, with its memoirs of Mamie Till, which is Emmett Till's mother.
hmm,
And a lot of people, I'm not going to assume people know about Emmett Till. Emmett Till was the 14-year-old young man who went down south to Mississippi to visit family and friends.
hmm,
A lady said he did something he didn't do. As a result, they came to his house in the middle of the night. His great uncle's house, excuse me, in the middle of the night.
yeah,
Took him out and tortured him and beat him to death. Tortured him,
mhm,
broke bones, cut ears off. I mean, to a 14-year-old child and beat him to death and threw him in the Tallahatchie River.
yeah,
And these two men were found innocent of that. But this, I think his death was so shocking that it was the impetus for the modern day civil rights movement. It was a
mm,
rallying cry. But to this day, um, in a lot of African American households, uh, by a certain age, the name Emmett Till is always there.
yeah.
Yeah,
There's no doubt about that. Um,
yeah. So it's been coming on. It's very good. It has a lot of interesting parallels. Brilliantly done. I tell anybody, please watch it. It's a very good show.
so if you want to watch that, how can you watch that?
Well, it's on ABC. The
It's on
second
ABC.
episode is on tonight. ABC, yes. Of course, if you missed the first episode, you can stream it Hulu, or if you have the TV package that you can replay things.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, that is a very interesting part of history. Like I said, the two men that were actually convicted, that killed him,
Yeah.
were actually found not guilty. And because of double jeopardy, they knew they could not be charged for the crime again.
Yeah.
So once they knew they could not be charged for the crime again, what they did was they sold their story to a newspaper.
Yeah.
I put up, I think it's called Look. I put Look magazine, and they literally detailed what they did and why they did it. They sold the story for $4,000.
Okay.
And anybody get a chance, I put it on my page a couple of days ago. Just read the article and read how they were amazed that he didn't show any fear towards them,
Yeah.
and how they beat on him all night long, and how they tried to get him to show fear, and he wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting part of history. Um, yeah, please go watch it.
Okay.
The Story of Emmett Till. It's a very well done. If you're not aware of history or not a history buff like me, I will tell you that it is as accurate depiction as you're gonna ever see. And tonight deals with the court case. It's directly from the court transcripts and the reporters that were there at the time.
Okay.
So you get a feel exactly what happened.
Okay. Now, do you mind sharing your Hulu password with anybody out there that may want to stream it? But
Yeah,
can I get your
man.
Hulu password so I can look at it? No.
Yeah, BWYYOUROWN.
Okay.
Buy your own.
Yeah.
Uh,
Something else that's very interesting that recently happened is the three folks who murdered Ahmaud Arbery. They received their sentences, and the father son murderers they received life in prison without the possibility of parole, and the guy who filmed it, he received life in prison with the possibility of parole.
Good.
You know, I tell you, if minding your business, if minding your own business had a picture, like if you can just imagine a meme, when minding your own business goes wrong, that's what I think his name is Roddy. He's the one that
Yeah,
videotaped it.
yeah,
Man,
but if you listen to the judge,
yeah,
the judge said that Roddy chased him
mm-hmm,
and Roddy helped trap him.
yeah,
But like I said, even though he wasn't the malicious part,
yeah,
like the judge was talking like, yeah, you showed remorse,
mm-hmm,
but you
yeah,
were convicted of felony murder, so
yeah.
come get these Skittles.
The judge went in. The judge went in I mean, he didn't hold back. I mean, I think he was
Yeah,
pretty even killed throughout the entire trial. And I tell you,
yeah,
I probably watched 90% of it. But he
yeah,
really he let them have it when he read that sentence. And I think within the first within the first 2 or 3 minutes, I kind of had an idea where this was going.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And the thing is, it's how you can look at this thing. When I see people like when they were found guilty, right?
yeah,
And everybody celebrate, right? And the thing is, that should be telling, because when you can tell how accustomed people are to getting justice by their reactions to when they get justice.
yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So this should have been not even a no-brainer. This shouldn't have been covered. But the fact that there have been so many people who've gotten away with killing African American over the years and have gone free, right?
Yeah,
When people see somebody who on camera, because guess what? If it wasn't the camera, they wouldn't have got convicted. I
yeah,
guarantee you that. Um, the people are elated and joyful, and I'm thinking, wow, the expectations of the justice system must be pretty low when
yeah,
African Americans are killed at the hand of racist white people sometimes.
yeah.
But history has told us that anyway.
And then the other case with the taser and the police officer who mistakenly well she shot her gun instead of a taser. She was also found guilty,
Yeah,
and I think
yeah,
I'm not sure what her
if
sentence is. So
yeah,
yeah,
and you listen to the jury. it basically came down to um, being that many years on the force and all the distinctions between the a gun and a taser, uh, the moment, the pause before she shot, all these things could let her know it was a taser. I think that went into it as well. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, you can't. I mean, I think the guy Fruitville Station, Grant, I think it's Grant, the kid that was killed.
Hmm.
That cop got off free.
Yeah.
Um, when he quote unquote mistake the gun for a taser.
Yeah.
But you know, when you are trained and you make that mistake, they make them those things different, different sizes,
Yeah.
different weights, different size. They do it for a reason. So it makes it impossible for you to make the mistake.
Yeah. And I think one of the jurors that spoke out, she said that they requested to actually hold the taser and the gun that was used, and they said that that was very, by
Oh
them having
wow.
by them having the opportunity to hold both the gun and the taser, that was kind of Chris Rock said it, man. He said some people. He said being a cop is hard, man. Chris Rock said it in his special. He said being a cop is hard. He said, but some people can't make mistakes. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the thing. Some people have to be perfect at what they do. They cannot make mistakes.
Well, the thing is, man, with law enforcement, my issue is not with law enforcement. The
Yeah,
problem with issue is that the same laws that are there to protect good cops, and they need to be there to protect good cops.
yeah,
Those same laws protect cops with ill intent as well,
yeah,
and therein lies the problem.
yeah,
Like I said, we talk about it all the time when me and you was walking Hardee's that time, we walking back to Trent Court to get something to eat, and the cops were putting lights in our face and stuff like that. And if we would have flinched and had the attitude, you know,
yeah.
yeah.
Uh, hold on.
So it's not like I tell people when I get pulled by the cops, police officer, I'm gonna have my hands. I'm not doing that for the good cop.
Correct,
I'm doing that because if I happen to catch that bad cop, which we have sometimes,
correct,
I'll put myself in a position not to catch a bullet or a
correct,
baton or a taser.
correct.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so let's talk about our today's show. I can tell you, I was minding my own business last weekend, and I was on, and I was on, I like to look, I like to, I tell you, I rarely, if ever, actually watch the news now. Um,
Yeah.
so I get a lot of, I get a lot of news from Twitter, and I was looking at some on Twitter, and then I saw that a major political party in the United States, the Texas Republican Party, the Texas
Mm.
GOP, put out a tweet. Um, and the tweet had, I'm gonna see if I can pull this up. If I can pull it up. But anyway, the
Yeah.
tweet
When I
had a line of people waiting to get a COVID vaccine, and the Texas GOP said, if you can wait in line to get a COVID vaccine, then you should be able to stand in line to vote. And, I kind of looked at that, and I had to read it a few times because I was like, this has to be like a parody account. Like this can't be. I don't know. This can't be true. To conflate getting a COVID vaccine with voting. And so I said, so I read a little more. And then I do what I normally do. I called Junior. I said, Junior, man, I said, look, man, stop what you're doing, man. I'm sending you something right now. And I
yeah,
sent him that
yeah.
text, and we was like, you know what? We need to talk about this.
Yeah, when I get a call on the weekend, man, I'm like, in recuperating. I get that call. Stop what you're doing. I said, man, what's going on here? So obviously, something apparently triggered my little brother.
Yeah, yeah. And it was triggering, and because it was triggering for a couple of different reasons.
Yeah,
Now I'm not going to get too far ahead because we're going to talk about Texas, but we ain't going to talk about Texas today.
yeah,
we're gonna go back in history to talk about what happened with voting rights in the beginning. But the thing about this tweet that I thought about, especially if you know about Texas, is my thing was, who was that tweet directed to? That's what I'm thinking about. Like when you send messages like that, that's a message to somebody. And
Yeah.
so they're saying if you can wait in line for a COVID test, then you can wait in line and you should be able to vote in person. Well, he not that tweet was not talking to the primarily affluent areas of Texas
Yeah.
because the studies show that the affluent areas compared to the disadvantaged areas, and then also compared to minority areas that aren't disadvantaged, there is a stark difference in the amount of time it takes you to vote.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so basically,
Yeah.
go ahead.
No, no, go ahead, finish.
Yeah,
You're right.
so
You're right.
basically,
Yeah.
that tweet they were talking to a certain segment of voters in Texas.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, it's downright. And this was on their official
It
website.
was
This was
on
official website.
their official website.
Yeah, and here's the thing: it's cruel because you know that you're passing laws, you're closing DMVs, you're closing voting polls locations, so you're making these people have to wait to vote 4 and 5 hours versus me. I can go get in and out of vote, in 30, 40 minutes, right?
Yeah,
Um, and they're doing it intentionally. And so, and like I said, it impacts, you know who it impacts? It impacts normally people who are normally not to vote for you, and people who are primarily people of color.
yeah,
And you know what? But guess what? Um, there's that saying, there is nothing new under the sun. And so I guess when we get into our, little bit into our discussion later on, a lot of those things relevant. These voter suppression laws and things of this nature is nothing new. This country has a history of, don't want to get ahead, but suppressing vote or keeping certain people from voting from the beginning, from
yeah.
when those men met in Philadelphia in 1789.
Okay. Yeah, and part of we're not going to make the assumption that everybody knows the history because I'm gonna be honest with you, I certainly didn't. I mean, most
Yeah,
of the stuff I know about history I learned over the last 20 years. I didn't learn in school, but I was willing to. I don't know. I guess it shows that you have to have a willing spirit, and you can
yeah,
be. There's a difference between being willfully ignorant and then just ignorant.
yeah,
Um, and what I'll say is people who maybe listen or um, who may be listening in the future, just have I would just say just have an open mind.
yeah,
Look at the facts for yourself, and then we'll lay out what happened then and what happened now because a lot of people still can't make that connection between what happened so long ago and present day today. 400 years. When you look at some of the other dynasties or other countries, 400 years is not a long time.
yeah. And,
You
and
know.
look,
Go ahead.
even let me bring it home.
Go ahead.
Uh, 200 years. The republic's only 200 some years old.
Yeah.
That's not a long time.
Yeah.
And to even break it down to you, there are people still alive today.
Yeah.
This is 2022, right?
Yes.
There are people still alive today who knew slaves,
Yeah.
former slaves. Look, a former slave that died in, if you were born in 1860, right?
Yeah.
You were born in slave in 1860, you lived to be 90 years old, you died in 1950.
Yeah.
So there are people alive today who have a direct connection to, former slaves.
Yeah.
You're exactly right, Wendy. Willful ignorance has run amok. You're exactly right.
And then,
Yeah.
as I was preparing for this episode, I was just running some numbers, right? And we don't want to get ahead of ourselves. But look,
Yeah.
the Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965. That was 57 years ago.
Look,
57 years ago.
yeah, we definitely getting ahead, but look, let me tell you, and I think we need to put it in perspective, and that's why, here's the thing, that's why sometimes my approach to engaging with people, sometimes it may be come off as snarky or may come off as condescending sometimes. I don't mean to be that way.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I'm not going to allow a person to be comfortable in their ignorance. Because some people know better, but they don't want to be in a position to, you know what I'm saying? Because here's the thing, that's where I call it integrity or intellectual honesty. Like when you like voter suppression, people say it's not voter suppression. But when you show exactly what's been happening, right, they say, oh, but then they go back with the same stuff. Right? You know what I'm saying? Because here's the thing. If voter suppression benefits their side, they have no problem with it.
Yeah.
But let's yeah. But
Yeah.
we'll get there, bro. We'll get there. We'll get there.
So look, I'm gonna defer to my brother for a couple of things. My brother is the historian, and so what I think what we're gonna do is we're gonna go back. We're gonna go right. We're gonna go way back. And Junior, just kind of explain for the audience um, um, what the framers' intention was on who they wanted to vote, um, who couldn't vote, and more importantly, why.
Yeah. But man, look, and like I said, please feel free to fact check me. But look, one thing about me, there's some things I know, some things I don't know, but I do know this here.
Yeah.
Um, the framers, you gotta understand. I always, when I start the Constitutional Convention with my history students and my civic students, when I discuss the Constitution, um, always there's a picture on my wall, a poster in my classroom, and it's a huge poster,
Mm-hmm.
big, huge, um, and it's the Constitutional Convention. And the first question I ask them, and it goes over their head when I ask them that most of the time, I said, "Who's there?" And they're looking. I said, "Who's there?" And then they can't get what I'm saying. But as I go into the instruction, when you see George Washington, Ben Franklin, Gouverneur Mort, all the people that were there at the convention,
Mm-hmm.
these were rich, wealthy men, rich, wealthy white men.
Yeah.
Okay, that's who was there. And people make this assumption that when they were there, they were representing the interest of everybody. But in reality, when the Constitution was first established, the only people that could vote were people like the men at the convention. Uh, that I guess the 1%, as they say,
Yeah.
rich, wealthy people. So if you did not own, if you were a woman, couldn't vote. If you were a slave, obviously you can vote. And if you were a poor man who couldn't, who didn't own land, which was the majority of people at that time, you could not vote. And here's another thing. That dynamic was in place. I think the last state to allow non-property owners to vote was our great state, the old North State of North Carolina, in 1860, right? So North Carolina was the last state to take the restriction of having to own land. Now you have from 1789, I think, when the Constitution was ratified, from 1789 to 1860, that part of the population could not vote. And so that's about 60 or so years, or whatever how many years it is, worth of legislation, worth of whatever, put in place. Judges, court decisions, everything. So yeah, in the beginning, uh, in this country, everybody could not vote as people would think. Only the people who own property. Yeah.
So why do you think when you think about the poor farmers, uh, poor white men, why do you think they didn't allow them to vote? Why do you think they put that in place? That stipulation they
Well,
have to own land.
well, yeah. Well, here's the thing. It goes back to something that was put in I want to say Article 3. I want to say, or no, Article 2. Article 2 of the Constitution, I think. Um, the Electoral College, right?
Ooh.
Well, there we go. The thing that's the big thing, the Electoral College. The framers in the beginning, um, the framers put the Electoral College in place, right?
Mm-hmm.
They put the Electoral College in place because just in case the people, the poor people, or somebody did elect somebody they didn't like, that was a trigger because they didn't trust. They looked down on uneducated people. Um, I think people still do that today, as a matter of fact. They come for their votes, but they patronize them, Donald Trump. But never mind. I'm not gonna go there. I'm just saying. I'm, I'm just saying. But in the beginning, the electoral college was actually put in place because the people at the time did not trust those people, and just in case they made a crazy decision, that was a safety guard in place. Now, of course, that's changed over the years, of course,
Mm-hmm.
but that was the original intent of the founders, because they had Shays Rebellion, and these poor
Mm-hmm.
people were the Shays Rebellion. There were a
Mm-hmm.
lot of rebellions. Bacon's Rebellion is one that was during, I think, I want to say during Washington's administration. I think no, excuse me, the Whiskey Rebellion.
Mm-hmm.
The Whiskey Rebellion was during Washington administration. But whenever you have these poor people who don't have a say, they start rebelling and things like that. These people vote, and
Yeah.
so, like I said before, they wanted that safeguard in place. Yeah.
What role did the patriarchy have in determining who could and could not vote?
Well, like I said, when you talk about, well, elitism, definitely, right? But patriarchy, yes, because women, for the most part, in a lot of cases, were considered property, right?
Mm-hmm.
So women couldn't vote. Oh, I think I froze for a second. Am I good now?
Yeah, you get down.
I'm good. Okay. Yeah. And think about it, man. Look, the first thing, I know a lot of people don't remember a lot of high school history, right? But here's one thing they do remember. They do remember taxation without representation, right? When the colonists, when they were arguing against being taxed by Parliament, didn't have representation.
Yeah,
But guess what? The founders came and did the same thing. Tax these people without having them the right to vote to make decisions. But
yeah,
to your question, yes, patriarchy, yes, women couldn't vote
yeah.
as well, as a matter of fact. And women did not get the right to vote. I want to say until the 19th Amendment. You might want to Google it right quick. I think the 19th Amendment was passed.
Yeah,
I
we'll
want
we'll
to say
get there. We'll get there.
19. Okay, we're getting there. Okay, we're getting
Yeah,
there. Okay, yeah,
we're
we're
gonna
getting
get
there.
there. We're
Okay.
gonna we're gonna we're gonna try to do an abbreviated version of history so we can get to the point where we are now and understand how
Okay.
it's all connected. But you're right.
But yes, so in the beginning,
Yeah,
voting was really meant for wealthy, educated white men.
yeah,
Period. That's what voting was meant for.
yeah.
Now we have evolved, but the thing is, sometimes when you evolve, sometimes you devolve back to things that you did before. Unfortunately,
Correct.
because when that group wants to hold on to the power, they put safeguards in place to make sure they keep it.
Correct.
All right.
Um, and then so now let's just fast forward the Civil War because there are a lot of things going on now because even when you talk about women's suffrage, that started.
Yeah.
I mean, it started to gain steam probably in the late 1840s. But I think the Civil War is kind of what put them on the back burner. But a couple of things happened. One, the Civil War, and then all the emancipation of the formerly enslaved. So now they're emancipated. They're they're free,
Fresh.
and
Fresh.
so now they want to participate in the what we call the American experiment. Um, and I think um, what was man, these amendments all run the what was it the 15th Amendment?
Which
Which
one?
amendment gave the 15th Amendment dealt with being able to
Voting.
vote. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think around
So
1870 that was
yeah.
the former enslaved they were given the right to vote. They said all citizens have the right to vote.
Uh,
Um
all
yeah.
men,
Yes.
black
Yes.
men can vote, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
men.
Men.
Um
Yeah.
but during this time is now because there's a lot of things we talk about racism, but now we have to talk about structural racism now when it
Yeah.
comes to once that amendment was passed and then African Americans they wanted to vote. What were some of those structural loopholes that were put in that was aimed at not letting them vote? the formerly
Yeah,
enslaved vote, citizen vote.
yeah. Now you're getting into making those connections to today.
Yeah,
Uh, and so you mentioned the 15th Amendment, but you have to mention all. You have to mention those Civil War amendments, which
yeah.
was the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery.
Well,
I want to
slavery.
say
Yeah.
1865. The 14th Amendment, which is I want to say 1868 or 1868, I think, which gave citizenship rights to African Americans,
Hmm.
equal protection of the laws, and then the 15th Amendment, all three of those together. Now, it seems that everybody benefits from the 14th Amendment except African Americans, who was meant for. That's a whole nother topic.
Yeah.
But um, to your point, yes. So when the 15th Amendment was passed, we have to go through. This was during Reconstruction,
Correct.
okay? And this was when there were troops in the South to make sure laws were carried out, right? During this time, but when Reconstruction ended and the troops had to leave, then here's what happened. They start passing these things called
Well, hold on,
the
hold on. We got to
oh
go there for a second. We got to go there for a second
okay.
because you just triggered a thought. Okay,
Uh-oh.
because no, you left out a very important piece because we have to. Um, was there a contested election?
Oh yes, so did look. Um
Okay.
the election of 1876. Tills Hayes Tilden.
Rutherford B. Hayes.
Um, yeah, Tilden Hayes. And listen, here's why I think it's important for African Americans. This is why I'm an independent, unaffiliated, because and I'm gonna speak. I'm just gonna say what's on my mind. This is just my opinion. When we get into what you're saying,
Yeah.
when it comes to African Americans, we've made the mistake, I think, historically, of confusing common someone having your common interest with being an ally. Just because you have a common interest with somebody, it doesn't make you an ally. Them an ally.
Yeah.
And when Afro Americans were Republicans at that time, and so basically, I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but basically, what happened is that a deal was struck. It was a close election. A deal was struck um, by the Democrats who were ran the South at the time to give Hayes those electoral votes to make it short. And as a result, they said we'll take the troops out the South, right? Who were there to support African Americans,
Hmm.
protect them from being lynched, making sure their constitutional rights, all those things, to pull them out prematurely, right? And so when they pulled those troops out prematurely, they were literally killing African Americans in the street,
Yeah.
passing these laws. So that's why when I hear people say, "Oh, they threw up the part that okay, well, the Democrats were the party of slavery and the Republicans were the party of Lincoln and blacks," yeah, of course, yes. But when it was time, Afro Americans voted for Republicans at that time because they shared mutual interest.
Correct.
Republicans got votes to pass legislation they wanted. African Americans got mutual interest. But when it was time for the Republican Party to be an ally in
Hmm.
1870, they chose what? So that's what I'm saying. And the same thing can go with Democratic Party.
Yeah.
Democratic Party. So it goes both ways. So yeah. So, but that being said, I hope I broke it down enough,
Yeah,
Andrew.
we had to include that because that's
Yeah.
very important, especially as it
Yeah.
pertains to voting rights. Because what
Yeah.
was happening during that time in the South before
Yeah.
that deal was struck with Rutherford B. Hayes when he, so it's very important.
Yeah. Yes, you had African American senators. I think Hiram Revels was you had a black senator in Mississippi.
Yep.
You had congressmen from South Carolina. You the state government. Afro Americans and everybody were participating in the government like they were supposed to because the laws were being enforced.
Correct.
Um, but what happened is once the Republicans made the deal with the Southern Democrats and pulled those soldiers out,
Yep.
those Republican, excuse me, Democrat legislators started passing the laws that you mentioned,
Yeah.
and they start passing laws. First, they passed the literacy test,
So let's
which
and so now we're gonna so now let's focus on those structural
is structural. Yes,
yes.
structural. This is look, let's not confuse the Ku Klux Klan burning a cross or somebody saying the N word with structural racism.
Correct.
Those are not the same. They want to distract you and say, well, racism is over because the Klan don't burn crosses in people's yards no more, so racism is over. No, that's not racism.
Yeah.
No, no, no. The structural part is what we're talking about here. And like I said, the first thing they passed, of course, was one thing called just the literacy test,
Mm-hmm.
which means the literacy test basically said you had to be able to read or something like that to be able to vote. Now, these literacy tests were just not reading. They'll say you had to walk in and say, well, how many pieces of bubble gum is it? Bubbles are in this bucket or something,
Yeah.
or how many marbles are in this jar, or recite the 18 lines of the state legislature from memory, right? And
Mm-hmm.
here's the crazy part: a lot of the people who were administering it probably couldn't even read, but it was voter suppression, right? So guess what? But guess what? Suppose it was an African American that could read,
Yeah.
right? Then they passed the poll tax,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which means you had to pay to vote, a fee. Um, that was actually made unconstitutional by an amendment that was passed in 1960. So the poll tax was taken out of place in 1960,
Yeah.
within our parents' lifetime. So suppose you could vote. I mean, you could read. Suppose you had the money to pay for it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then they passed this thing called the grandfather clause, right?
Yeah, I think we
And
talked about that
basically,
a little bit. Yeah.
yeah, we talked about it a little bit. And so the grandfather clause basically said, hey, if your grandfather did not vote in a previous election, then guess what? You could not vote.
Mm-hmm.
And guess what? Most African Americans at that time could not vote.
Yeah.
Grandfathers were slaves, so of course they didn't vote. But guess what, Aunt? Let's take a little farther. Suppose you could pay the tax. Suppose you could read. Suppose you were a freedman, because there were some freedmen who weren't
Yeah.
slaves, right? And you tried to vote. Then, they just kill you
Yeah.
because there was no law that was going to convict somebody for doing that. So that's what I say when I say there's nothing new in the sun with these structures when it comes to voting, and it's always been in place.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things, I guess it's fascinating. At the same time, there are two competing issues going on during that time period too:
Yes.
women's suffrage, and then also having the vote. So it's just very interesting how they converge and how I mean it's I don't know it, the benefit of having hindsight is like it's
Yeah.
when we talk about women's suffrage, like what are we really talking about though? Who are we really talking about?
Again, you're talking about. Listen. Look.
Look, just keep it
Let's talk
real,
about the
man.
stuff.
Keep it real. This is what we do,
Keep
man. We keep it
it
real.
real. Okay. Look, man. I'm
Keep
gonna
it
tell you.
real, bro.
Okay. Keep it real. Listen. You're talking about doing the progressive era. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're talking about the progressive era between 1890 1920s,
Mm-hmm.
right? All these reforms going on. When W.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington were going at it back and forth, Plessy versus Ferguson, all this time. Um, and so basically, women wanted to vote,
Yeah.
right? Well, no, no. Black women were part of the suffragist movement. But here's the part, and this part people don't tell about. That's why I say understand the difference between having common interests and someone being an ally, right? Because Afro Americans, Ida B. Wells, all these people were part of the movement, right? But look, the white women wanted the black women to march at the back of the line because they didn't want to offend uh, people that say there were black people in the thing. So of course they were like, no, they wouldn't do it. But it goes to show you that even when you're going for a common cause, their interest, the white women at the time, a lot of them, their interests were still aligned with
Yeah.
the social dynamic in place.
Correct.
We need these people to get our vote, get our right to vote, common interest. But when it comes time to be an ally for true equality, nah. See what I'm saying? So
Correct.
those are those two competing things. And guess what? Women got the right to vote. I want to say 1919. Please fact check me on that. 1920, 1919. Passed
1919 is
by
when it was passed, but I think 1920 is when it was ratified. There was
Okay,
one state that was kind of holding everything back.
well, I think it was Tennessee.
Tennessee.
Tennessee,
Yeah.
Tennessee, yeah, Tennessee. So, but yeah, but guess what? When women, when the white women got the right to vote, right? And then the South was in the middle of suppressing African American votes at the time. When those same black women that marched uh, at that time to help the white women get the right to vote, when they needed allies to help African Americans get the right to vote because they were being suppressed, uh, they weren't there for them. Like I said, understand the difference between somebody having sharing a common interest and somebody being your ally. Case in point, to make a reference to Emmett Till. At that time in Mississippi, African Americans made up the majority of the population, right? In Money, Mississippi, that place. Well, the majority of the population. Not one African American was registered to vote in the state.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just put it out there.
It's
Look, with the mamas within our parents' lifetime.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's the thing about history, man. History is history can make you uncomfortable once you realize. And look, I don't. I'm just gonna go off on a sidebar at some point, but
Yeah.
uh, I still remember, man, when you went out to college, man, and
Huh?
and
What you say?
I still remember when you went off to Shaw University, and and like I say, man, you gave it that book, the autobiography of Malcolm X, man. That's like, but this is the point though. Now I'm gonna use a term that has been appropriated incorrectly, but when we
And you
talk
said
about what it means, go ahead.
I went to college and got black.
Yeah. Well, I ain't talking about that. I'm talking about woke.
I know.
I'm talking about woke.
Woke, yeah.
I'm talking about there's what some people call woke, and they have misappropriated that word.
Oh
But
yeah.
then there is something that we in the African American community we know what it means to be woke. Okay, um, but I think that we go through a stage where it's like anger because once you and I think that's why I think there's a
Yeah.
method to why when you look at all of these laws that are being passed now, putting everything under the umbrella of critical race theory when it's really actual history. Um,
Yeah.
I think that is by design because once you understand history, I don't know, it just I don't know I don't know especially with an open mind, I think it changes you. And
Yeah. Well, I think the issue, the problem with critical race theory, or what they have with critical race theory, is not what's happening is that people are now beginning to critically analyze these structures,
correct,
and they're beginning to analyze with a critical eye,
correct,
right? Because now the memes aren't working, and people are getting more informed.
yes,
And like I said, the thing about it, and I'm glad you made that reference to Shaw, man, about the when I gave it about Malcolm X. I think when
hmm
I gave it to you, you read it straight through.
yeah, yep.
Yeah, and I mean,
And I hated reading. You know, I hated reading back then.
yeah, I know, and I was like, man, you gotta read this, man, you gotta read this, man, you gotta. I was hanging, yeah, but I gotta. But the thing is, but um, one thing when you start to look at history through a lens, uh, coming from New Bern High School, not taking anything from my history teachers at all,
Yeah,
right? But when you go back and look, there was obviously some things that were left out
correct,
intentionally,
correct.
whatever. And so once you begin to get this information and you begin to analyze, yeah, you go through that anger stage, that cynical stage,
Yeah,
and then there's up to the point where a stage of maturity
correct.
where you understand these things, and when you see these laws being passed, these voter suppression laws, you have that frame of reference. But guess what? In high school history classes, they're not teaching about the grandfather clause like that or these structures that are in place. I'm teaching it, but they're not teaching them to the point where the kids can understand it.
Now, what year did you graduate from high school?
Man, I graduated high school in 1990. Man, I was in Coach Matthews. I was in Coach Matthews' advanced history class and advanced government class, I think. And Coach Matthews, man, we used to be debate all the time. He called me a militant encyclopedia. That's what he used to call me.
But my point
There's the
is, you
militant
graduated high
encyclopedia.
school. You graduated high school 20 years after the Voting Rights Act, like after the Voting Rights Act was passed.
Oh yeah, what? Wow. Look, let me put it. Let me put it this. Let's look at it this way. Uh, Me and you are in that first generation
Hmm.
to actually start high school. I mean, start school from
Integrated, yeah,
kindergarten through 12 through integrated schools.
correct,
We're
correct,
in that first generation.
yeah,
Look, I graduated from high school. Look, we graduated from high school with 2 homecoming queens. I don't know. That may have stopped when you graduated.
Nah, they
We
didn't happen
had
when I graduated, but I know what you're talking about.
we had two. We had a black homecoming queen and a white 2 homecoming courts. And I think it stopped with you because I think your homecoming queen, I think was Jen Merle. I think if I'm not mistaken, in '92. I
Yeah.
could be wrong, but yeah, I know more about your class than you. Ain't that so? No, but no way. But to your point, but no. So even though integration has started, we had 2 homecoming queens. There was still remnants of that still impacted our life, and I thought that was normal. But yeah, to your point, you made a good point, man.
But then also access to information is a little different than it was back then because we had no way of outside of word of mouth. We had no way of knowing what we were, what we were being taught. Hey, look, Abraham Lincoln was my man back in the day. You know what I'm saying? Like, man,
Yeah, yeah.
he freed my. But once you know, what the more you learn, then you're able to have those
Those
nuanced
nuanced
conversations.
discussions.
Okay,
Yes.
because it you know it's I don't know. I think during that time period it was a lot of complicated people back in those days, and they had to make some tough decisions. But
Yeah.
um,
But look, here's the thing. You're right. But you know what? I don't give them a pass though. Um,
no, you don't give them a pass.
yeah, I know, because like even with the founders, there were people at the Constitutional Convention who argued against slavery being evil. So there were people who knew better. Even with Lincoln, Lincoln was like people keep thinking Lincoln the Great Emancipator. Lincoln acted in his interest.
Correct.
And Lincoln said, if we could, in a famous speech, he said, listen, he said clearly, he clearly believed that African Americans at that time were subhuman,
Yeah.
right? And he said, if we could keep slavery and the Union together, we'll keep slavery.
Hmm.
And you got to understand, when he did the Emancipation Proclamation, he gave reparations to people who owned slaves in, I think, Maryland and Delaware, those border states,
Yeah.
who lost their slaves.
Yeah.
So, and look,
$50.
yeah, so yeah,
But I think
those
the
things,
point is you don't give anybody a pass.
yeah,
But
yeah,
but the more you know, you understand all
yeah.
the competing priorities that surrounding all these decisions
Yeah,
that's being made, and then I think that's how you can that allows you to be able to have a wholesome conversation.
exactly, exactly.
Um, but I still think it's interesting that you know it it you can't back in those times you can't escape the race that you were because like I'm saying because otherwise when you talk about women's suffrage and
Yeah,
you talk about what does it mean for women's suffrage, it means that you have white women that want to vote and then you have black women also that's still considered a part of women's suffrage. So how do you square that?
yeah. Well, you square it. It's like that's why I keep making go back to the point I made before. Um, the difference between having shared interest and somebody being an ally,
Yeah.
right? And like I said, yeah. When people have this Pollyannish view of history, right? And the high schools now kind of watered down. They kind of skim over stuff. They don't unpack the information,
Correct.
you know. And so, and they say, oh, uh, African American slavery ended in 1865. African Americans got the right to vote. Uh,
Hmm.
but look, don't know that women can get the right to vote.
Yeah.
People assume that the Constitutional Convention, everybody could vote, whatever. No, sir. So now you're starting to understand these nuances, right? And look, um, the Civil Rights Act was passed in I want to say 1964, and I think the Voting Rights Act was 1965. I may have the years switched around, but guess what? That's like 90, almost 100 years after the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. So the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, all these things, they were passed to enforce amendments.
Correct.
So technically, Afro Americans really, in the modern era, just are now getting their citizenship rights since 1965, right? And so, and now you're asking why in certain areas where Afro Americans are trying to catch up. Okay, yeah, because a lot of Afro Americans are just now getting the right to vote. And guess what? Just because you got the right to vote in 1965, you still have structures that were put in place that was voted on without Afro Americans in mind.
Correct.
For the previous hundred or so years.
Yeah.
Right? So you have 100 years worth of legislation, 100 years worth of laws and customs and attitudes. 1965.
Yeah.
Fast forward some 60 years later. So we're still turning the corner.
But before we come full circle, let's talk about Lyndon Baines Johnson. Let's talk about him and what he meant to the, you know, that poor man didn't he decided he couldn't take it, man. He's like, I'm not running for a second term.
Yeah, I think the Vietnam War got to him. But look, and this is a case, and this is the point you made me earlier about how complicated it is, right? Because when it comes to Afro Americans getting rights or making advances or laws in place to get Afro Americans voting right, housing right, things of nature, Lyndon Baines Johnson probably had the greatest impact on Afro Americans. And Lyndon Baines Johnson, the racist from Texas, right? The racist from Texas.
Yep.
The segregationist from Texas.
Yep.
Use the N-word more than anybody, right?
Yep.
But he ended up signing legislature. He signed the Civil Rights Legislation Act. He signed the Voting Rights Act.
Let's back up real quick. Because we got to talk about. So you say that if you say that Emmett Till was the inflection point for the civil rights movement, you have to talk about the impact of Bloody Sunday on. If there's no Bloody Sunday, I don't know if the Civil Rights Act is passed.
Great point. There were always people pushing for civil rights, but Emmett Till was a spark because it galvanized the people. Because what happened is when they tried to bury it in the ground where all those, when they killed black people, put them in the ground, nobody could see nothing. That changed the game because that went all over the world, right? Same thing with Bloody Sunday. Shout out to the late, great, my fraternity brother, a great man of Phi Beta Sigma, John L. Lewis, who led the protesters in Bloody Sunday, almost got a crack skull, almost got killed trying to get the right to vote. When that went out all over the world. Yes. And you got to put it in context. Don't want to get too deep into history. Put it in context. What's going on at the time? You have the Cold War going on. You have the Vietnam War going on. You got the United States trying to get things done at the United Nations. And the United States can't sit there and criticize the Warsaw Pact, which is Russia, Czechoslovakia, all these other countries, and criticize them when you're hanging and lynching African Americans here without recourse. So all those pressures came to play. So it wasn't like that.
And then also one last thing, you have I'm gonna put a plug for Malcolm X. You also have Malcolm X understanding that the best way to kind of solve this domestic problem that's happening in America is to open up to an international audience. So all those things are converging at once. And then all of a sudden, that's what happens in Selma, Alabama.
Yeah, because now you have these you gotta understand, you have these newly independent African nations who are at the United Nations, who are at the UN facing racism in the United States. So it's a whole lot of things that that go into these decisions. Yeah. So Bloody Sunday, it was domestic, but it had a international impact. So passing these laws they were good, but it also helped internationally as well. But to your point though, back to what we were talking about though, Yes, the fire, Lyndon Baines Johnson signed that legislation, a Democrat, and as soon as he signed them, uh, the racist people in power or with those attitudes, they have been fighting to take those rights away ever since. They never stopped trying to fight.
Correct. And then also another consequential issue that happened with Lyndon Johnson is then you know what I'm about to say, right? It is
Say
the
it loud, say it proud.
yeah, it is the how do I want to say it? It is the can't think of how I want to say it. It caused a switch between democratic priorities and Republican priority, and so the landscape switched. When did
Yes,
yeah, we can talk about the Dixiecrats and all that stuff, but we just talk about
yes,
vote now. But so there are
yes,
a lot of consequential things that happened during that time period that laid the foundation to where we are now.
yeah, exactly. And the thing about it is those Supreme Court challenges, like I said, the voting rights, now African Americans are voting, right?
Yeah,
And that had a lot to do with the switch because you gotta understand
the party switch.
the party switch, yes, because guess what? And Lyndon Baines Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act, so African Americans, Housing Act, Fair Housing Act, Civil Rights Act, voting rights. So what? African Americans are going to vote
Mm-hmm.
for Democrats. And so what happened in all these states, right? All these states like Mississippi, where there were majority African American, majority African Americans started
Mm-hmm.
voting in numbers, and they started changing the landscape.
Yes.
Now, what happened is that these forces in place who wanted to stymie the African American vote, they played the long game, and they waited and waited and waited. And that's what I'm saying. That's why even with the Voting Rights Act, the key thing it wasn't just giving African Americans the right to vote and uh, making excuse me, making the 15th Amendment
Mm-hmm.
real for us, right? It also, when they wrote it, they clearly understood that just because you pass these laws, it doesn't mean these southern state legislatures are not going to try to suppress the vote.
Correct.
That's why in certain states they included Section 5, which basically said that, hey,
Yeah,
if you
we're gonna
were
get
a
there. We're
state
gonna
like
get there. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, if
yeah.
you had a history of keeping African Americans from voting, then whatever maps you put in place, whatever redistricting maps, it had to be cleared by the Justice Department. So guess what? They could not put things in line that actually discriminated, right?
Correct.
That was Section 5. But we all know what happened with Section 5 with Shelby versus Holder.
Yeah, because what? Because when because when did gerrymandering really start? You
I mean,
know.
actually, well, to be honest with you, the term gerrymander actually came from Eldridge Gerry. I
Yeah.
think he was a governor of, I want to say Massachusetts. Please Google to make sure if I'm wrong. I have no problem with being corrected.
Yeah.
But his name was Eldridge Gerry. I think he was from Massachusetts. This was the colonial times where he tried to draw lines, crazy lines, to uh, to dilute the vote to favor him during that time period. So the practice of gerrymandering, it goes way back.
Mm-hmm.
We just added, now we added a racial element to it.
Now, one thing I say about gerrymandering is that they both sides do it. I mean, both the
Yeah,
Republicans
yeah,
and the Democrats do it.
yeah.
I just think the scale is just a little. I don't know. I think it's a little different. Um,
Yeah, the thing is, man, like for instance, there's a line right now that they draw a line straight North Carolina A&T in Greensboro.
mhm.
They drew a line right down the middle. So if you're on A&T's campus, half of it is one voting district and half is another.
Yeah.
Because what they do is they have a heavily Afro American area that if they vote together, it's enough to probably put a congressman there. But what they do, they split it and divide it into three ways
Mhm.
and cut up that vote three different ways. And that's the issue is that yes, both sides do it, but did it of course, but not to the extent uh, that the Republicans are doing it because they are intentionally, without shame,
Yeah.
uh, doing it based on race.
Yeah.
And all there are a lot of people who want to play willful ignorant or say stole all this crazy stuff. No, you gotta just tell them no. It's based on race, and that's it. And the thing is, if it's not, disprove me. But the thing is, when you try to give them the information, they want to stay in their willful ignorance, in their houses of willful ignorance. But nah, I'm coming with a sledgehammer, bro.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So yeah, that was kind of the abbreviated version, but I think we want to get this out the way so we can talk about what we really want what we really want
yeah,
to talk about.
yeah,
But we'll have to do it on another episode. But trust me,
yeah.
it's been hard to hold some
We
stuff
got to
back.
build the groundwork. We got
Yeah,
to
we have to
create the line
lay the
work because
groundwork. Yeah. If you're experiencing some cognitive dissonance right now, it's okay. That mean that something about you, something inside of you is stirring up and saying that ain't right, and
yeah,
that's okay.
yeah. Look, here's the thing. Uh, here's. Do you know when cognitive dissonance really kicks in? When you say something like what I said about the founding fathers
Yeah,
or about whatever, and then they go read it for themselves,
yeah, yeah,
and they say, oh,
yeah,
oh.
yeah.
But they're not going to change their internal dynamic. See, that's why I say intellectual dishonesty is a
Well, then
characteristic.
that's a choice then, because I think that's a choice. I think that the goal is to, like I say, is to have the information, because the idea that in the year 2022 that we are still experiencing some of the things that took place over 100 200 years ago in 2022. I mean,
Look,
it's and you
well,
say
here,
why, and it's like, oh, they're just making excuses and not, no, you have to look at the data. Yeah, what does the data say? Bringing this full circle about that tweet in Texas about saying that um, if you can wait in line to get a COVID test, that you can wait in line in person to vote. What I'll say is, look, the ability to vote is a constitutional right. Okay, you can't dictate to me how I want to vote. Okay, you may want to go stay in line, and I think that's fine. Okay,
yeah,
but you can't get mad if I decide I want to vote by mail. You can't you don't get to dictate the right way to vote. Okay, and I think that's the issue that I have with that tweet, because I know
well,
that was a tweet that was directly sent out to say to black folks, other people of color. Okay, there's no excuse for you now to not vote in person. That's the way I interpreted that, especially when you look at what Texas has done since Shelby Holder, since that case was decided.
yeah. Like I said, man, if you look at why a lot of Afro Americans were murdered and lynched during the civil rights era, it was over registering people to vote. So obviously there is a connection between voting and power,
Correct.
right? And people clearly understand that. But like I said, when you say how can you say it's in 1922? Like I said, man, Voting Rights Act was passed in Mama's lifetime,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So like you said, I graduated in 1990. Like you said, that's how many years after? 35 years after the
Yep.
Voting Rights Act. And guess what? It still had to be implemented. School desegregation was passed in 1954, but New Bern High wasn't fully integrated into what, 1972, the
Yeah.
year I was born. So 15, some 16 years after the fact. So just because people have this thinking in history, unfortunately, that, oh, they passed the law, problem solved.
No.
No, no, because the problem that was being solved was being created for over 200 some years.
Correct.
That's where critical race theory comes in. Why, even after these laws are passed, are African Americans or groups still having disparate incomes? Because the structures that were designed and put in place are still have the same attitude. So, but that we don't want to get back on that horse no
Yeah, we
more.
don't want to get on it because
Yeah, but
the thing is there
it
you can
all
have two.
ties in. It ties in though. It ties in.
Correct. You
Yeah,
can have there are two competing thoughts, I guess, and this is
yeah,
what I say because I understand the history. Okay, 1965. Okay, 57 years ago, and exactly what you said. It's not like, okay, he signed the paperwork and then everything goes. No, that means up until that point, you had no impact on where you went to school. Well, let me rephrase that. You, if you wanted better education, you did not have you had no vote. None of your interests were being fulfilled because you
Uh,
did not have that political power.
uh, uh, I look. I wouldn't say better education. I say access to better
Yeah,
resources. Because a lot of African Americans think that in segregated schools they got more. That's a whole another story. But
yeah,
it's
that's a whole
not.
other story. But my
Yeah,
point is
but
that you had no impact on the impact to improve your life through legislation it was non-existent. It was
yeah.
non-existent.
Couldn't
And
get a house loan. Couldn't get a housing loan.
correct.
Farmers couldn't get loans with losing their property. All kind of things. Yeah.
And so in the year 2022, when I see a lot of conversations and people say no, this is 2022, I'm not trying to say I'm certainly not a victim. And I
Yeah.
don't think most people are saying that they're victims, but you just have to understand 57 years ago is not a long time. It is
Yeah.
not a long time ago when prior to that you had no political power and during the time that you okay, I'm gonna throw in one thing because I know we gotta go.
Yeah.
So there was a time, I will say there was a time when um when black legislators and white legislators were working side by side and were actually
Yeah.
thriving. And so what happened? What happened, Junior? What happened?
Little bit. Little. We talked the Children Hayes Compromise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we also
And
talk
then
about Wilmington. Let's talk about what happened in Wilmington.
yeah. Yeah. Look. Whenever Afro Americans Tulsa, when they became affluent,
Yeah.
look, when look, even in spite of the racism at the time,
Correct.
and when they were left to say, okay, if you don't want us in your places, we're going to build our own place. But guess
Correct.
what? When African Americans built their own places and developed it, if it became better than their neighbors, then they burned it down and killed everybody and took the land.
And this is an important point I made to somebody, right?
Yeah.
You look about what happened in Tulsa. Look, how many generations ago was the Tulsa massacre?
Well, you talking about what? 19, what's that? 1919, was it? 1917, 1919?
There are still businesses around that have been passed on through generation to generation to generation that's still producing wealth for certain families. Just
Yeah.
imagine and just imagine what would have happened. Let's just say Tulsa, and this was happening all across.
Yeah,
Um,
that was just Tulsa. Yeah.
so yeah,
The
it wasn't
bank.
just Tulsa, but just imagine if the generational wealth that was passed down, could have came to fruition now, I think we'd be having a different conversation. So that's
Yeah.
why part of me is saying, you know what, I understand that there's better opportunities now. We have more opportunities now than we've ever had. However, there are still structural problems in place, and
Yeah.
you just have to
Both can be
acknowledge
true.
that.
Yeah. Both can be true.
Yes,
Yeah. 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 And that's what I'm saying. Just because we've been able to um, carve out a good life for ourselves and our families and things of that
yeah,
nature, it doesn't mean that I'm ignorant because there are still things as an African American I still experience.
correct.
Yeah, and so yeah, but people who say stop crying the victim, they can kick rocks.
Yeah,
Kick all the rocks.
yeah,
Um, because just because you want to ignore history or parts of history makes you feel uncomfortable. And my thing is this here. I know we got to go. Um, if history is that long ago and you weren't there and those are my ancestors, they were not me, then why do you feel so insulted when I bring up things like that?
correct.
Because why well, you want to have your cake in it too. You want to, what they say, the soul has no secret, their behavior will not reveal. You want to give out the image of, I'm not saying all, but you know what I'm saying, the
Yeah,
ones who I'm talking to, the image of, oh, I'm all inclusive or whatever. But deeply inside, you harbor those same resentments and those same red prejudices that the people that lynched people back in the day. You just don't want to say it out loud. You be like, oh, I'm down for black causes, but I don't want a black neighbor. Yeah, I get you. Yeah, but nevertheless,
yeah.
we're going to still nobody. When you point out these issues, is not crying the victim. So
No, it's definitely not crying the victim. And then
yeah,
a lot of things, it's like, a lot of people don't know the history. That's just a reality. Look, I didn't know it.
yeah,
I mean, so that's the thing. A lot of people, but I would tell you that all those legislators now that are trying to pass these anti critical race theory is not being taught in being taught in K through 12. They send their kids to private schools because
Yeah,
they want to dumb down. They want to attempt. I'm not gonna say dumb down though, but look, you can tell a lot by what you educate what you educate your population.
yeah. They look. They know better. Ted Cruz and all these people, Harvard educated, they know better. They definitely know better.
Yeah,
But like I say, when you play on the willful ignorance of people. I think Martin King said there's nothing more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity.
yeah,
Nothing more dangerous. And I think that unfortunately there are a lot of politicians that are playing on those both. Now, a lot of politicians that are playing on those internal dynamics where people who felt before where they couldn't express these type of racial
yeah,
animosity things because it was socially unacceptable. Now they're feeling they have a voice to be able to do that. But that's a whole another
yeah.
story. So
But
we're
I think
definitely
in closing, what I would say is we there is an election. The midterm elections are coming up next year. What can you
yes,
do today? I don't care what your political affiliation is, but what can you do today to make sure that that there are no issues? One, it you can either go down to your local board of elections or you can look online to see if you are
yes,
registered to vote. That's the first thing.
yes,
Make sure that your address is updated to make sure that you are registered to vote.
yes.
That's the number one thing that you can do, and you have to make that a priority. Just like you make it a priority to go to the grocery store, or you have to make it a priority to say, you know what is my voter registration status?
Yeah. You can go on, you can go online, man. You can go on the website
Yes,
online right now
yes,
and type in your name and everything. It'll
yep,
pull up if you're currently active because we did a voter registration drive during the pandemic and we were trying to register people and we were phone banking and everything
correct,
and kind of find out people were purged from the voting poll and
correct.
didn't even know it
Correct.
until
Yeah,
we found out. So
we're gonna get to that. We're gonna get to
yeah,
that. You
okay,
got
okay, okay, yeah,
that's coming up. That's coming up.
okay.
What's the second thing that you can do? I know this is controversial, and I know I have a different opinion. I personally believe that you should have an ID to vote. That's my personal opinion. Okay, if you don't have an ID, go get an ID. Okay, go and get an ID. If you need to borrow some money, don't call me. You call it. No, I'm joking. But no, I'm being serious. If an ID is one of the things that's in your way from being able to vote, go get an ID.
Let's just
2022.
let's hope they don't close the driver's license down in your neighborhood.
Look, man. Even if they do that, midterm elections are coming up in November. It's January. There's enough time. There's enough time. If you don't have an ID, go get an ID. Um, I think those are two or three concrete things that you can do tomorrow, and it would go a long ways in not having to. Because sometimes life gets in the way when it's time for you to vote, and then you have to make a decision. No, don't get yourself in a situation where you have to make a decision on the day of. Plan ahead. Make sure that all of your affairs are in order, and that you have all the proper documentation. That's the best call to action that we can do, regardless of what political party you are.
All right.
All right, man. That's a lot.
I know, man.
That's a lot to put in for an hour, man. That's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah. I think hour 14. So yeah, man. So yeah, this laying the groundwork, man. So we'll get there.
Yeah, we'll get there. So yeah,
Yeah.
we will. There was one more thing that I wanted to say. Anyway, I can't think of it.
Yeah.
Like my brother said, if you didn't have the chance to go check out the what's the name of that show again?
Oh, Mothers of the Movement. I think it's on now. Mothers of the Movement.
Mothers of the
Mothers of the
Movement.
Movement.
Okay.
Um.
All right, that's all I got.
All right. All right, man. Look, man. Until next time, man.
Yeah,
Uh.
and
Peace out.
yeah, and also thanks for all the people who are watching. Thanks for all the people
Oh
who
yeah.
comment.
Thanks. Yeah.
Like I say, we definitely appreciate it. We thank you for all the support, and you're right. Until next time, we'll see you again.
All right. Peace out, man.
All right, peace out.